Brian already mentioned the model of Anton Dogen for emotional development, and I'm very happy, Roger, that you gave me 1 hour to introduce this model and its relevance for mental health in people with ID, as I think it is a very fundamental issue which cannot be neglected when you have to do with people with intellectual disabilities. And now I want to invite you to a little journey inside the brain of Wiley to introduce the model of emotional development to you.
Just Wiley and me forever. I'm Joy. So, can I just, if you could, I just want to fix that. And you've met Sadness. I'm not actually sure what she does. And I've checked, there's no place for her to go. So, she's good, we're good, it's all great.
Very nice. Okay, looks like you got this. Very good. Oh, that's her curtain! Look out!
That's Fear. He's really good at keeping right.
Easy, huh? My back! Oh, we're good. We're good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we're back.
Did he just say we couldn't have dessert?
That's anger. He cares very deeply about things being fair.
So that's how you want to play it, old man? No dessert? Oh, sure. We'll eat our dinner right after you eat this.
Right. Here comes an airplane.
Oh, airplane. We got an airplane, everybody.
Okay. So I really like this movie because it gives you a good idea how our inner emotional state corresponds to our behavior and how our emotional state is decisive for the behaviors you can observe in people. And these basic emotions, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and joy, they evolve in the brain, in the so-called social brain. And meanwhile, we have a good insight which different brain areas and also connections between different brain areas are involved in emotion and emotion regulation. And now this is a really important point. We are not born with those circuits. They develop. We are not, when we have to do with newborn people or babies, those kind of circuits, the mentalizing network, the empathy network, and so forth, they don't exist. They evolve during the maturation of the brain and the interaction with the environment. And in people with developmental disabilities, of course, the development of those systems is also affected. So the evolution of the emotional brain depends on genes on the one hand, so it's kind of inner factors that we cannot change, but it also evolves always in the context of our environment and our experiences we make, especially our experiences we make with other people. And we now use the development of the emotional brain as a model because, it's shortened, because people with intellectual disabilities principally pass the same steps of development, but the development may be delayed or it may be incomplete. So out of those different developmental milestones, Anton Dogen developed the model of emotional development, and he divided it into different steps, and here we come to the levels Brian was already referring to when he was saying that DBT should be started at this stage 3 and not in earlier stages, because the prerequisites you need to really work with the program are not available at earlier stages. But before or at the beginning now, I think it's important for you to explain the model and the different stages and what is connected with the different levels of development a little bit more in detail. And I brought you another movie, a little movie, to give you an emotional impression of people functioning on stage 4. Okay. So this is a little movie from a nurse from France who wanted to demonstrate how you can wash newborn babies. But apparently these were twins, and I think you can very good see that this is a very sensory stage of being. You discover your own body, the very basic structures of your own body, and the environment by your senses. You are doing a big job in the integration of external and internal stimuli. Yeah? If you have a hurting stomach, it means a world for you. If there is unexpected noise, you really fall into exaggeration. You have actually basically no impulse control, or very, very, very few. Yeah, you can suck at your thumb maybe to regulate for a moment, yeah, but you are dependent on a very sensitive and respondent environment to support you in regulating your stressful life. And you don't have object permanency at this moment. Something that you cannot see or hear does not exist. Only things exist which you recognize with your senses, because you don't have an inner image of the outside world in your head at that stage. So if the caring person hears the red circle and the individual who develops is the yellow circle, you are very close to each other. You are actually not really separated from the view of the developing child. So what do people need in this level of development? Basically one, physical comfort. The attitude of carers has to be focused on care, the satisfaction of basic physical but also emotional needs. Avoid starvation, thirst, chilling, pain and constipation. Avoid sensory overload and boredom. They are dependent on a responsive person that supports them to regulate themselves. Physical and sensory interventions are very supportive, as I showed in the different pictures. Structure helps, security and mirroring behavior also helps them to get a feedback on how they are, how they feel. And if you observe mothers interacting with, or fathers as well, interacting with small children, yeah, they often mirror the behavior. They sometimes even exaggerate it a little bit to to make clear in some way that it's not their own feeling, but the feeling of the child, and support then the child to calm down again. And what I actually present here now the first time ever is that I hypothesize that the whole mental health care in people with intellectual disability should be aligned to the level of emotional development. There are certain mental disorders that show up at very early stages, but others do not, because a certain ability to reflect about yourself and your environment is necessary. For example, to develop a general anxiety disorder, or social phobia. You must be aware that there's somebody out of your head judging you. And on CO1, you're not aware. The environment and yourself is just the same. And we have lots of autism spectrum disorders in this developmental level. We see lots of ADHD, reactive attachment disorders. As adult psychiatrists, we have to learn about mental disorders that can be observed in children. Again, we have to go back. We have lots of tics disorder. We have pica, rumination, feeding disorders. We don't have body image disorders, because you need to be able to reflect on yourself and your body to have those kind of disorders. It's something totally different if a person on a low emotional developmental level has feeding problems instead of one on a higher developmental level. And we rarely see general anxiety disorder, social phobia, substance abuse, only iatrogen, you say so in English. If you continue with benzodiazepines or so, but not the people themselves, they don't develop it. Actually, you don't have personality disorder because your personality is not that developed. We can't have dissociative disorders, and the kind of severe challenging behavior we observe in this developmental level, I called a contact disorder with lots of self-aggression because you're not aware that there's somebody out there, stereotypic behaviors, social isolation, high irritability, severe temper tantrums, and also lethargy. Not ID associated, but also often observed in people with on stage 1 is depression, PTBS, schizophrenia, and of course they also can develop dementia and fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. One disorder I pronounced is autism, and our research has shown that autism is often associated with delays in emotional development. Here the green ones are people without ASD, and the yellow or orange ones are people with ASD. And here's the level of emotional development. And in most different aspects of emotional development and also overall, people with ASD are at a lower level. But I think it's not really surprising because ASD is a developmental disorder, a severe developmental disorder. And as you may see here, we have certain domains or aspects of emotional development that are better developed in people with ASD than others. For example, relating to peers, communication, and so forth, they are often more severely delayed than object permanency, which is here, domain 4. And this typical pattern for people with ASD can be used to support the diagnostic process. Here we formed a special algorithm for people for the diagnostic workup of autism, and if we fill in here the values we get from the emotional developmental assessment, and if you calculate everything together, those with a value above 0, this would support no ASD, and below would support ASD. Of course, this is no ASD test, but especially in those with severe ID where the usual tests cannot be applied, this is just a little something that can be supportive for the whole picture. Yeah? Okay, let's continue with the next stage, stage 2. Stage 2 is also a very interesting stage. You'll realize that these two guys are on a totally different level than the twins we saw at the beginning. They now already have a rough scheme of their body, and they can use their body as an instrument voluntarily. They mirror each other very well. They communicate. They have an idea that there is somebody out there. They try to align according to the significant others and develop a basic sense of trust. They have interest in peers, but it's just at the beginning to develop. The interaction is often very imitative, or you often see parallel game. They play next to each other but not really interacting. And now object permanency evolves. So the life of somebody on stage 2 is still very much arranged around the next carer. What does somebody need on stage 2? Safety and security. Attachment is the base is based in this period. So you need to ensure that there are 2 to 3 attachment figures around. You need to ensure a calm and secure environment for these people because they are highly irritable. And you always need to have kind of an invisible wire between you and the client, as we try to ensure here in our hospital. This is the room where the staff is meeting always, and we made a window into the door so the staff can always be seen from the outside. Yeah, they are never left alone. Yeah, and here is somebody just standing here, and this is often the case. Yeah, somebody in this stage shouldn't be left alone when he's in a crisis. Usually when people are in a crisis, it might be beneficial to leave them alone, that they can relax and calm down on their own. If you are talking, and then they get more and more exaggerated. Not so with people on stage 2. They might need a calm environment also to calm down, but they need to have the feeling not to be left alone. Don't do time out. Yeah, it might be very extremely stressful for them. Object permanence develops. Transitional objects are very important. Hide and seek games are very interesting, and they need support in changing environments. Interpersonal affect regulation is very important for people at that stage. Studio 3, which is especially developed for people with, it comes from Britain, with autism spectrum disorders, but also intellectual disabilities, is a very good example to successfully support the staff in de-escalation. Physical interventions, just as in stage 1, are still of importance, and you can establish basic rules like please speak quiet, but you should not expect somebody to do it because of a moral understanding, why he should not hurt somebody. Moral is not developed yet. You can establish basic rules and say, well, that's a rule here. You don't need to explain. Just say, we all speak quiet, or nobody, we don't hurt each other, so you are also expected to do it, but don't expect somebody to do it because of he takes care of other people. He has not really developed the prerequisites that are necessary that this could be expected from him. Here's a picture drawn by somebody on stage 2 in our hospital. As you can see, it's already grown up. It's a drawing made with the whole arm. There's a scratch here in the picture. It's thorn, because the movements are not really very coordinated, and in that stage somebody is interested in the process of doing, but not in the result. They don't care about the picture that comes up in the end. So somebody in this stage actually would not be to bring him to a working place where he is expected to produce a certain number of something. You can do it, but don't expect him that he will understand why he's doing it. Here is an example of a situation in our hospital. This man, whom you can see in the middle, he pulled a bean pack, and all the pellets went out and were thrown over the floor. And actually, you could say this is aggressive behavior. He disturbed the bean pack, and he has to ensure that everything is tidied up afterwards again. But you could also say this is a very creative man, because in our hospital we don't have the materials, raw materials, in this stage he needs to make his experiments with the material world. And so he produced his material on his own. And fortunately, my staff realized that he did not intend to harm anything or anybody. And they let him even play a little bit with the pellets, and then they put everything together. This is a total different way of responding to an aggressive behavior than staff usually does. Again, in stage 2, there are certain mental disorders that can often be seen or less often. We still have ASD, ADHD, and tic disorders, attachment disorders, now a mixture of reactive and disinhibited attachment disorder. Specific phobias arise, and only seldom the disorders I already mentioned before. And severe challenging behaviors in this stage can often be described as a disintegrated disorder with high irritability, affective liability, inappropriate screaming, impulsivity, and aggressive and temper tantrums. Those items, Trina, actually from the ABC. That's why. Yeah, this is research we made with the aberrant behavior checklist. Okay, the next step is stage 3. A very challenging stage again, because somebody discovers his or her own will. So we now have the self-other discrimination. People in this stage are in a constant symbiosis autonomy conflict. This is also a very stressful stage for the people themselves. They need to separate from the next, from the close carer, but they experience it also as stressful and full of anxieties. The way of experiencing the world is still very egocentric. There's an omnipowerful self. The interaction is self-referred and dominated. The exploration of material is now also process-oriented, and external regulation of the self is still necessary, although people now make their first steps towards being able to regulate themselves, their own affects and stressful situations. The basic need in this phase is autonomy. So what do you give them? You try to support their autonomy, and you try to support the person itself, support self-efficacy, balance reward and attention, allow it to take over responsibilities. Structure is extremely important, but structure not to punish somebody, but to give him orientation. He's now widening his view and realizes many issues he didn't realize before, so structure supports him to orient in an increasing environment. Teach is thought for people with ASD, but it works perfectly also for people in this stage. This man, here we thought he has had ADHD. He was admitted to our ward to rule out ADHD. And actually, I must admit, we did it like you. We gave him methylphenidate because from the clinical picture, we were not able to distinguish between ADHD and stage 3. And methylphenidate did not help, not at all. It did not change. So we worked with this approach. And here he was on a teach table, a classic. Here's the work he has to do, and here he does it, and then the work he finished he can put in the cupboard on the right. And we started with 3 minutes. We have had the time timer, 3 minutes you have to stay here and work on the... and during the stay in our hospital, he was there for about 6 weeks, he was able to work for 30 minutes. We did it in the beginning, in the morning, and also in the afternoon, so twice a day he was practicing, and he made huge steps during his stay. And we also involved the caring team outside, and it was interesting. Some months later, he came again to our hospital because he has had pneumonia, lung infection, and the team was standing there and wanted to start the program we have had for him because he was very so much attention seeking that it was really a stressful patient, but we did not need it. Yeah, he calmed down by the time that this approach was now working and carried on by his team at home. So you can establish social rules. You can try to start with basic token concepts, but no elaborated ones. There's no logic thinking yet. Yeah, if I do that, this is the consequence. This connection isn't made yet. Logic thinking is not his task at this stage. It comes up later, so we cannot expect it from him. And so you can start a little, but it has to be immediately after something good happened. You have to give the reward. And mainly the self-regulation works from the environment. Common mental disorders, ADHD can be additional, but can be instead of. It's differential diagnosis and comorbidity are the same. We see lots of disinhibited attachment disorder. I think this is actually the most important differential diagnosis of ADHD in people with ID. Specific phobias and so forth also apply here on this stage. As the challenging behavior we can observe in this stage is a disorganized disorder. Lots of hyperactivity, lots of attention seeking. They are following you like a shadow. Lots of impulsivity, lots of temper tantrums, high distraction, verbal aggression, and defiance. Okay, so let's move further on. We have already half an hour now, but these are really basic issues at this stage. The next stage, stage 4, is the phase of identification. Now you have secure attachment to the significant others, and the importance of your attachment figure decreases, and the importance of peers increases. At this stage, people develop theory of mind. They can distinguish between fantasy and reality. They can change their perspective. They can develop empathy, shame, guilt, and pride. And there's also much development in moral thinking, and there's a change from an external to an own conscious. The basic need is belonging to a group. The creativity is now goal-oriented. They want to draw a nice picture. They start to accept social rules. Actually, from stage 4 on, you are from your developmental level capable to be in a group of people. Logic thinking starts to involve at the very first steps, so you can start to work with token concepts, and people are more and more able to regulate themselves. So skills training is really, can be successful. Now we can also observe other mental disorders like anxiety disorders, including social phobia and general anxiety disorder, body image disturbances, dissociative disorders are first seen in children aged 5 and older. So this is a reference age also of stage 4. And substance abuse personality disorder also arises. The behavioral disorder we observe is identity disorder, difficulties with finding and defining your own identity. I remember one young man this was really also a tragic case for me. Who found peers on a playground, yeah, because people were functioning on the same level as he was, but he was a young man, and the parents were afraid. They were thinking, what does he do on the playground? Why does he want to play with my child? And I understand these fears as well, yeah. But he got his picture got to the police because somebody was afraid, and then he came into the police file, albeit nothing happened so far. And one day a boy was abused by a young man in a bus, in a public transportation, and he identified my patient from the picture in the police. And it turned out that at the same time my patient was with his grandparents in vacation, so it couldn't have been, yeah. But things like this happen, and this is really difficult. I would never lay my hand into the fire. I mean, about sexuality, it's really difficult, yeah. But these are constellations that arise in people of this stage. Okay, and the last stage, the final stage in the developmental model of Anton, stage 5, the stage of reality awareness. Now you can observe logic and rational thinking, and people are coming to school at the same time usually. You develop an attitude to morality and social rules. You have an active interaction with peers, and it's a give and take. You have lots of competition with peers, not because you want to be better than the others. The essential of the competition is that you want to get to know who I am and where I am and what can I do, and where I'm not that good. People develop loyalty. They have a more and more realistic judgment of their own abilities. Am I fat? Am I slim? Can I read good? Can I calculate good? Whatsoever. They deal with materials in terms of product orientation. Now they are really capable to work at working places and to be involved in a productive process and take over responsibility for this. And in the best of all worlds, they can regulate themselves. The basic need in this phase is self-esteem. So the question is who and how I am, and the methods can be aligned to the different abilities that are now seen. Our concept of psychiatry can be more or less adapted. The usual concepts can be driven, like Janelien, not right? Almost. Pointed out for borderline ID. And you can apply in general the same procedures and approaches and adapt it to the slow and abilities to learn, and also to the differences in communication. Okay. So, the concept of emotional development has actually its origins, or it is driven by a neurobiological background. And what we were talking here about, the different functions that arise during development, they are regulated in different systems of the brain, and especially in the limbic system. And here in the deep limbic level, which includes structures of the diencephalon and also the central nucleus of the amygdala, basal functions for survival such as feeding, reproduction, and fight-flight reactions are regulated. Moreover, autonomic function and the stress regulation system are located in this part of brain. These structures develop mainly prenatally, and they are mainly unconscious. They occur unconscious. You are not aware of them. And the basic functions described in stage 1 of the developmental model are regulated in these brain areas. And then the mesolimbic system consists of subcortical areas, which are mainly located in the basal ganglia and also in parts of the amygdala. And this part of the brain, which develops mainly prenatally and in the very first months and years of life, basic emotional functions such as anxiety, sadness, disgust, happiness, and anger are determined. This emotional condition acknowledge, differentiate, and allow us to acknowledge, differentiate, understand, and regulate the own emotions. And we learn this by interaction with the attachment figures or other persons around. These brain areas are decisive for nonverbal communication, reward, and also reward expectation. And they serve as a basis for motivation. And the functions described in the developmental model in stage 2 and 3 can mainly be observed in this area of the brain. The upper limbic level consists of allocortical structures, mainly in the frontal cortex, but also in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insular cortex. This part of the limbic system is responsible for more complex emotional stages like shame and friendship, loyalty, empathy, and so forth. And theory of mind network, executive function, impulse control, and so forth. And this responds to the functions described in stage 4 and 5. So not the level of ideas, you said, but the level of emotional development is decisive for the adaptive behavior. I think that intellectual disability and emotional development, of course, they correlate. They are highly correlated. But in some people, they dissociate. They are different. And you cannot, from the level of ID, say the level of ED. It may be different. And actually, the emotional developmental level is decisive for the adaptive behavior somebody shows. And ED, emotional development, is a mediator for the correlation of level of ID and adaptive behavior. I hope I explained it enough. And now the central question is, how can you measure the level of emotional development? And Anton Dogen developed the CEO, the scheme of emotional development. Philip Morrison, my colleague here from Belgium, developed it further on, the CUR and CUR2. And as an international working group, which you can see here, the whole network of Europeans on emotional development, we together developed the ZS, the Scale of Emotional Development Short, or SEED in German, or CUV in Dutch. And it's also already published in Dutch and in German. And this network, since we started to work together, we meet annually, and next year we will meet in Great Britain in September. And yeah, you're very much invited to attend. We'll see whether you have time and resources for this meeting. We started to validate the scale we developed together. For me, this was kind of proof of a concept, this study here. We applied the scale in typically developing children. Even one of mine was evolved in the study. And yeah, we looked at the age of the child and the result of the ZS. And there was a very high correlation between the age, the chronological age, and the result of the test, so that we really think that the behaviors described in the test are typical for behaviors that can be observed at a certain developmental age. Knowing the level of emotional development gives you an idea of the basic emotional needs of somebody, and this is important because the behavior you can see of a person is according to its basic emotional needs, which differ according to the level of emotional development. And every level leads to different motivational schemes to behave a certain way. And not only for behavior, but also for perception. How you see the world, how you perceive what is happening around you, depends on the level of emotional development. Because it's not only about emotions, it's also about your mindset. The ability to mentalize. It's also something about your intellectual mindset. What means mentalizing? Mentalizing is the ability to look at yourself from the outside and at the other person from his or her inside. Mentalizing develops stepwise. It usually can be observed when theory of mind is present, but the steps before are the following. At the very beginning, you have a goal and action-oriented thinking. Yeah, you want to catch the ball or be with your mother, you just crawl towards it. You don't think about it. You don't need words. This is a very sensory stage of thinking. If you get a kiss by your mother, she loves you. Yeah, this is everything. In the next step, which develops around 1.5 years, thinking is reality. You cannot differentiate between your own thoughts and the world outside. What you think is reality for you. If you think there's a monster in the cupboard, there is a monster in the cupboard, and you have all the anxieties that belong to this stage. And further on, you can observe pretend thinking. So in this phase, imaginative play is detached from reality. Yeah, you are able to separate your fantasy, your own thoughts from reality, but there's still a big gap in between. They are not connected. Yeah, there's this fantasy room and there's reality, and they are not really integrated. This happens then when you are able to mentalize. Then you can differentiate between reality and fantasy, and integrate the emotions and experiences from reality into your fantasy, and understand that the inner world is unrelated but at the same time connected to the external reality. Okay, and people can fall back to those non-mentalizing ways of thinking. Actually, not only people with ID, also we do. Yeah, when we are in stressful situations, we also have an action-oriented way of thinking or acting. And it is good to know these different modes of thinking, to understand how the inner, how the organism is organized, how the inner world of somebody is organized. Okay. So this brings me now to the final ideas. If somebody with an intellectual disability shows any kind of problem, you first have to assess or have an idea of the level of intellectual disability and also the stage of emotional development. And then you can, on this basis, you can do your proper workup with physical diseases, mental disorders, and also behavioral disorders. The level of ED and ID show you what kind of behavior is normal for this guy. What can you expect from him? Yeah, and maybe some behavior may challenge the environment, but may be normal for him or her. Yeah, because he's doing his job on this stage, properly. And it will also allow you to decide which mental disorders you can expect and apply, and diagnosis you can give. Okay. If you deal with challenging behavior in the first 3 stages of emotional development, train the staff, support the staff to regulate the client properly. On stage 4 and 5, you can start to train the client, support the client to regulate himself or herself. So the level of emotional development and mental disorders are very closely connected. And the kind of mental disorder you can see depends on the level of emotional development, but also the mental disorder can influence your level of emotional development. For example, I remember very well, this was really very impressive, a client with psychotic depression. He was having very lively pictures of that he would die and that he's bleeding out of his own whole body, and people will come and catch him and murder him, and the next car he saw will carry him to his burial and so forth. This was really very strong pictures he was drawing, and he was always approaching the staff, help me, help me, help me, help me. I can't stand this. And when we treated him with antidepressants, he started to get better in the afternoon. And because he has had his Morgentief, how do you say? The disorder was more severe in the morning hours and got better in the afternoon. And so in the afternoon he was playing cards with the peers on the ward, and in the morning he was always following the staff. And so he was on stage 3 in the morning and stage 4 in the afternoon. And when we discharged him, he was stage 4 all day. And when he got sick again, he fell back to stage 3. Yeah, so the level of ID can be different during life, but the level of ED is even more sensitive to change. Yeah. So our biopsycho social model to approach people with mental disorders has to be enlarged by the fourth dimension, the developmental perspective, and also the level of emotional development needs to be addressed. Okay. So here are some books. Philip, I think he also wrote a very new book together with Anton Dogen about the developmental approach. I don't have a cover yet, but this is the first one they wrote together. Anton Dogen himself wrote different books in different languages, or they are translated in different languages. My colleague Sabine Zepperitz, who is a pedagogue, and myself, we wrote together this Ages of Emotions, and a second edition will appear in spring next year. The book of Paula Stärkenburg, Developing Attachment, is very helpful, very supportive. These are the assessment instruments, and in October or November this year, but unfortunately appears in German, a book about mental health and intellectual disability, including all those ideas and principles, will appear in German. Okay, so my final thoughts. The emotional developmental approach gives you an insight into the inner world of people who have difficulties with expressing their own thoughts and feelings. It reveals their basic emotional needs. It can support can be aligned to this basic emotional needs. People experience maximum level of consistency with their inner and outer world. It's not important to get further and further and further. For me, the stage, meanwhile, is not decisive. The fit index is the essential thing, as you saw in the model of Grave, that the person and the environment fit well together, and the needs and abilities of somebody are acknowledged from the environment, and then you can have a good quality of life in every stage of emotional development. And it's also decisive for certain mental and behavioral disorders. And when you acknowledge it, you can get a comfortable state of affairs and live up a person's full potentials. Thank you for your attention, and my staff for their gorgeous work.
It's a pleasure to me to give some comments on Tanja. I have 4 comments. Tanja is a remarkable and smart colleague in her field, not only because she's a psychiatrist, but she is deeply convinced of the fundamental importance of emotional development in the mental health care in people with ID. I think, Tanja, your appeal was never so loud as today, so intrusive.
Okay.
I think not many psychiatrists are so convinced of that approach. They allow only the approach because all other frameworks, traditional psychiatric frameworks, especially medication, didn't work anymore. That's a little bit my experience. Thank you for your catching plea. Let me add one argument to use this approach. I believe it's also humanizing for our clients and their environments, and it enhances their quality of life. 2, one of your favorite issues is the connection between emotional development and autism spectrum disorder. And I think you made a good addition with your research and with your algorithm to the more traditional cognitive approach of autism spectrum disorder. Mm-hmm. And what is important also, that you did it with some evidence-based publications, and I think for our movement it's important, and you are stimulating to that, that we do some research and we made some publications to spread our ideas and to find more evidence. 3, in one of your last schemes, I could see a very nice connection again, integration of brain system, emotional development, emotional needs, cognitive development, psychopathology, motivation, also good, and also system and environment. I think with that theme we have a very integrative, a very broad perspective on our population. And last, your presentation was very instructive and vivid with movies and themes and drawings. I think, like we said, the need to good education and training for staff, we know that is very important. But I think if we do that and help them and support them, we have to do it with this kind of attractive and recognizable packages. So I think that was a good practice how we can educate and train our staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I must admit I was really worried because I thought I have the strongest respondent of everybody. And now you're so calm, Philip.